Hey there, welcome to YouTube. If you are into poetry, if you are into literature, if you are into cultural history, then you've come to the right place. Cardboard Box Productions makes podcasts about all those things, so be sure to click the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so that you never miss a new episode. Obviously, we mostly make podcasts, so you can also go to anywhere you get your podcasts, if it's a place other than YouTube, like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and you can subscribe to our podcast feeds there. All right, I hope you enjoy this episode. Hello and welcome to Close Talking, the world's most popular poetry analysis podcast from Cardboard Box Productions Incorporated. I am co-host Jack Rossiter Munley, and with my good friend Connor McNamara Stratton, we read a poem,
talk about the poem,
and read the poem again.
Before we get into today's selection, a quick note that if you like what we do here at Close Talking and have a spare minute of your time, it would mean the world to us if you would give the podcast a rating and review on Apple Podcasts.
Those ratings and reviews help boost us up the algorithm and find new listeners.
And if you have suggestions for future episodes or comments on this one, you can send us an email at closetalkingpoetry@gmail.com.
And you can also find us on social media. On Twitter, the show is at Close Talking. I am at Jack Rossiter Munn, and Connor is at Connor M. Stratton. On Instagram, the show is at Close Talking Poetry, and on Facebook, it's facebook.com/closetalking. We also have a website, closetalking.com, where you can find all the past episodes of the show, and Cardboard Box Productions has just launched a newsletter, Unboxed, and if you go to cardboardboxproductionsinc.com, you can subscribe for more behind-the-scenes stuff on Close Talking and all of the other literary and cultural history podcasts that Cardboard Box Productions makes. On with the show. Welcome to another episode of Close Talking with me, Jack Rossiter Munley.
And me, Connor McNamara Stratton.
We are two good friends with one love of poetry, and so we come together to bring you this show where we read a poem, talk about that poem, and then read the poem again. This week, we have a poem that Connor chose.
Yes, we have a marvelous poem by Vuong called Anaphora as Coping Mechanism. And just a little bit of context. So Vuong was born in 1988. And he...
So what is he, like 12?
He's 28. 28 years old.
28? What is he, like 12?
Oh my God! All right, Jack, you're done. You're through. He came out with a book. He came out with a book of poems this past year in 2016 called "Night Sky with Exit Wounds," which won the Whiting Award and potentially other awards. But it was one of the biggest books in poetry last year. He is blowing up. I was at the AWP, which is like the big writers conference, and everyone was like, "Did you get Vuong's book? Did you get Vuong's book?" I was like, "No, but I gotta get it." And then I got it, and then it was great.
Got it good.
Yeah. He's a great poet, and it's his debut book. And so anyway. Just a slight bit of context, which I think will help. The title, Anaphora as Coping Mechanism. So anaphora is a poetic or a rhetorical device, which is repetition that occurs at the beginning of a sentence or phrase. So,
or replacing something to avoid repetition.
Oh.
It's like, instead of saying, "I want to go out," I want to go to the store. Say, "I want to go out. The store is where I want to go."
Okay. So we've got those two. I think those are both options. So another example would be, "We will not do this. We will not do that. We will not do anything we won't do anything at all. So the we will not do would be the anaphora. So I think that will be helpful in listening. Okay. Anaphora as coping mechanism. Can't sleep. So you put on his gray boots, nothing else, and step out in the rain. Even though he's gone, you think, I still want to be clean. If only the rain were gasoline, your tongue a lit match, and you can change without disappearing. If only he dies the second his name becomes a tooth in your mouth. But he doesn't. He dies when they wheel him away and the priest ushers you out of the room, your palms 2 puddles of rain. He dies as your heart beats faster, as another war coppers the sky. He dies each night you close your eyes and hear his slow exhale. Your fist choking the dark, your fist through the bathroom mirror. He dies at the party where everyone laughs and all you want is to go into the kitchen and make 7 omelets before burning down the house. All you want is to run into the woods and beg the wolf to fuck you up. He dies when you wake and it's November forever. A Hendrix record melted on rusted needle. He dies the morning he kisses you for 2 minutes too long when he says, wait, followed by, I have something to say. And you quickly grab your favorite pink pillow and smother him as he cries into the soft and darkening fabric. You hold still until he's very quiet, until the walls dissolve and you're both standing in the crowded train again. Look how it rocks you back and forth like a slow dance seen from a distance of years. You're still a freshman. You're still terrified of having only 2 hands. And he doesn't know your name yet, but he smiles anyway. His teeth reflected in the window, reflecting your lips as you mouth hello, your tongue a lit match.
Wow.
Yeah. That's that. Whew. I love this poem. I love it partly because I love that it uses a poetic term in its title, but also it's just, I don't know, to me, it's just a great example of form explicitly working with the content. So here we have Ocean Vuong, the speaker who is still a freshman in college, who I think has his boyfriend or lover has left him, or I think has died. And so he's coping with the loss of this guy. And what the poem starts in the present tense, and the way that I read this is that there's a kind of reverse chronology to how the poem moves. So the poem starts with can't sleep, which is on its own line, which is in the present tense after having lost this person. So you put on his gray boots, we're going out, and then we're thinking, and then, but he doesn't later on in like the 6th line, he dies when they wheel him away and the priest ushers you out of the room. So then we go back in time to presumably the moment, I think, when this guy dies. And then we go, I think, even more back. I think potentially he dies at the party where everyone laughs and all you want is to go into the kitchen and make 7 omelets before burning down the house. That is either, I think, after the speaker knows that his partner is going to die. Then later, he dies when you wake and it's November forever. And then he dies the morning he kisses you for 2 minutes too long. And he says, wait, followed by, I have something to say. And so that, I think, goes further back in time to when he reveals, I think, that he's dying, that his partner is dying. And finally, it goes back further to you hold still until he's very quiet, until the walls dissolve and you're both standing in the crowded train again. And then
You're still terrified of having only 2 hands, and he doesn't know your name yet, but he smiles anyway. And then his teeth reflected in the window, reflecting your lips as you mouth hello. So this goes further back in time to when they first meet, before any of this happens. And so to me, well, I just love that progression of reverse chronology. And the last kind of thing that I think in terms of form, working with the content, so anaphora as coping mechanism. So we have repetition as coping mechanism. So we can see this poem as sort of both maybe a record of events, but also the event itself. So we're drawing attention to Ocean Vuong writing this poem or reading this poem after having written it as a literal sort of coping mechanism. And the repetition is serving to do that coping. And so there's lots of anaphora throughout. The big one that is there is the he dies. So he dies is repeated, I think, 7 times in the poem. And within that, there's lots of smaller anaphoras. So there's if only, which happens 2 times in the beginning. If only the rain were gasoline. If only he dies the second his name becomes a tooth. There's later on your fist choking the dark, your fist through the bathroom mirror. Until is repeated a couple times. At the end, reflecting, so his teeth reflected in the window, reflecting your lips. And then finally, there's a repetition of your tongue a lit match, which is that's the interesting repetition of most of the other ones of the smaller clusters happen really quickly after each other. If only, if only. And then your tongue a lit match happens at the beginning. So if only da 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 da, your tongue a lit match. Like if only your tongue were a lit match. And then by the end, we have it returns as you mouth hello, your tongue a lit match.
Quickly, right at the end there's also you're still a freshman, you're still terrified of having, right. Which interestingly comes right after a line that starts, you hold still. Mm-hmm. So that's not fully there, but it's also, even on that, just sort of a half callback to the line that came right before those two.
Mm-hmm. What I love about this move, if we think about your tongue a lit match, so in the beginning, it's posed as a if only. So if only your tongue could be a lit match and you can change. And so in the beginning, we have not yet coped. And so if only this could be the case, maybe things would be different. And yet by the end of the poem in which anaphora has served as a coping mechanism, your tongue is a lit match. And so which is interesting because then time is working in 2 ways. So there's the chronology that's recorded, that's going in reverse, and then there's the sort of time of the poem. And so by the end of the poem, the tongue has become a lit match, which I think represents some kind of ability to be okay, or some kind of place that's okay. And then there's the reverse time, which is sort of like receding into memory. And so I feel like the way I read this poem, I've sort of gone on for a while, is the use of repetition to deal with grieving and the memory of all of these. Like now every time he remembers this guy, he remembers that he's gone. And so that is this kind of thing that he has to work through all of his memories to deal with in this repetitious way.
That's very interesting. And I love that last line. And I love the number of levels that this poem is working at, because if you actually mouth the word hello, your tongue starts at the top of your mouth and goes to the bottom, which is very similar to striking a match, which I just think is incredible. And
that's cool.
Because of the level this poem is working at and the attention to detail that is throughout it, signaled by the title, I absolutely think that that's intentional.
I think for sure, yeah.
Which is so interesting. And I think that what's really interesting is that through this repetitious retelling of recent history, I didn't read that last line as he is now in a place
where his tongue is a lit match, he's achieved his memory goal. I saw the lit match and the tongue and the callback. There's lots of mouth imagery all throughout this, and lots of discussion of teeth and mouths and tongues, and and this connection as well to fire, because the fire is also called out in the Melted Hendrix record, and that to me signals the relationship. It's the fire of passion that's sort of burning throughout both what is causing the rain to fall, which is not gasoline. It's what puts out the fire. It's the rain of grief at the beginning that keeps his tongue from being a lit match. He wants an expansive rain. There's almost nothing more romantic than a kiss in the rain. He wants his tongue to be a lit match in a gasoline rain that just lights the world up with their passion. That's impossible because his partner has either left him or died. In the memory of that, and by going through it, his world does not become one where he is now achieving that goal, but the memory that he reaches back to through starting with the grief is this joyous memory of their union, where in whispering hello, they struck the match that kindled the original fire. He's beginning a memory process we don't see that is remembering the better parts. He's worked through the grieving, the intense grieving, to get to a point where it is that passion and fire that now is not a melted, rusted record, is not, dampened by the rain. It is that small personal fire between the two of them that he can carry forward. It's not going to burn down the house. Again, that's another link of the fire to destruction, the connection to grief. He dies when you want to make these omelets and it's going to burn down the house. It's this different kind of fire. It's restating, it's sort of almost bringing the two meanings of Anaphora together, because he's reflecting the words he used earlier, but he's replaced all of the meaning. And he actually says, you can change without disappearing. I think that's sort of what's going on here. The fact of his symbol is still there. All of the meaning behind it has been inverted.
Yeah, I like that reading.
I think I see it. I think I have a slightly different reading than you did.
Yeah. No, I think that I'm sold. I'm convinced. There was a part of me that was like, it's the reading I have. Almost all the pieces line up, but I don't quite know about the last part. And so I think that that's probably more accurate, where he's reached a memory where that potential is still there. The use of the lit match as the sort of positive symbol is very interesting, because it's the capacity to kindle all that passion, all that stuff, but of course it's also destruction, and it bodes, like, it doesn't really bode well if it's not controlled. And
it being a match is the most finite version of a fire, but it's also the one with the most potential.
Yeah.
You usually light a match to light something else. You would use a match to start, if the match is like a relationship or that kind of fire, it's going to start them burning a fire that they tend the rest of their lives together, or something like that, if that's sort of where we're going with this. But if it's just a match, that's very small. Yeah. And you have these two places at the beginning where he wishes that the rain was gasoline, which we could really just see as a threat. He wants to burn down everything because of his grief. I want this lit match to strike into the gasoline rain and just obliterate the world. That's the image it evokes for me.
Yeah.
But at the end here, we have that small human fire that was originally kindled, that match of potential that, because of the poem, we can't really think of anything other than it going out very quickly.
No, that's right. As a sort of side thought, that another book that I recommend this whole collection, because this is in Night Sky with Exit Wounds, and he deals with a lot of issues in that book, queerness, trauma, loss. He's Vietnamese, and sort of the history of the relationship between America and Vietnam, very fraught, obviously, and those are issues. But within all of those just deep hurts, writing and language are sort of the ultimate tool that
Ocean Vuong articulates he has to deal and make something beautiful with. And so this is sort of one instance among many in the book where sort of poetry itself is the way to living a life amid all of this sort of ruinous suffering, kind of.
Definitely. I have a couple of parts of this that sort of stick out to me that I'm curious about.
Yeah.
And the first has to do with all this teeth and mouth and tongue business. What do you do with that? The title of the poem is a literary device. It's a written piece that explicitly returns to that component of the title to sort of give it a deeper cohesion and meaning. Why so much focus on the mechanism through which we talk and speak?
That's a good question. So just to sort of refresh, there's kind of your tongue lit match. If only he dies the second his name becomes a tooth in your mouth.
His slow exhale.
His slow exhale.
Choking, which is removal of breath.
Yes. And then the smothering, so, which is another really, that part is
That's the
intense.
other part I have.
All right, we'll get there. But smothering him, and he cries, and then the end, his teeth reflected in the window, reflecting your lips as you mouth hello, your tongue a lit match. Well, for me, part of it is, so were you making a distinction between like writing and speaking?
I'm just sort of curious,
okay.
because I'm not necessarily making a distinction.
Yeah.
I just think it's very interesting that so much attention is paid to not just the mouth, but the various components of the mouth, the notion of breath, exhaling, choking, crying out. It's all stuff that you wouldn't, it doesn't throw you out of a poem to see them included, but in a poem that's so intensely interested in anaphora as coping mechanism.
Yeah.
Writing or repetition in writing or this literary term as the mechanism of coping. This is a poem that to me is obsessed with mouths.
Yeah.
Which is maybe not something, it's perhaps to be expected in a poem that is about two romantic partners. But at the same time, it sticks out only because of the intent that the title signals me to be paying attention to in the poem.
Yeah, it's definitely conspicuous. I mean, my only two thoughts, which you've sort of touched on already, is, there's poetry occupies, obviously we're reading it on the page, but this we talk about the speaker, and he elsewhere, we talk about song. So it is in this between space between the page and the mouth, kind of. And so I think that he, even though we experience it in the book, he is framing it, and he does this elsewhere in his collection, as a song. And so the mouth and breath are sort of vitally important for an anaphora or some kind of repetition in that way. And then the second, which you've said, is this is very romantic, and this is about desire, and I think those are central parts of the body that he desires, or something, or that represents desire.
It reminds me strongly, partially because you said that the name of the book that this goes to, but the song "Because the Night" that has the line "desirous hunger is the fire I breathe," or something like that.
Oh wow!
Which is like everything that this poem is playing with.
Yeah.
In little snippet.
Yeah. No, that's great. I like that. No, but then with that, teeth still are. That's like an interesting part that I don't quite. It's a curious use, especially the two instances. If only he dies the second his name becomes a tooth in your mouth. That's kind of this wish for, the lover to become part of him, and then he can die because he'll already be in the mouth, sort of thing. But to think about the one you love as like, you're one of your molars or something, is like a. Yeah.
I have an idea about this.
You have an idea?
It could be.
Uh-oh.
It could be that what we are being led to in this work is that now that this person has departed, they live on in how their story is retold by those who remember them. That's what's going on in this poem through writing. So not only is the story told in anaphora, not only is anaphora used to reach the point at the end, but the very act of retelling the story is restating. And perhaps because spoken interaction is how it's most often going to happen, part of what we're being signaled towards is that we're retelling after departure the story of this person's life and this relationship specifically, but more generally, yeah, someone who you lose becomes a molar, becomes a part of how you interact with the world, and becomes something that you retell in who you are.
Yeah, I like that. I like that.
I also don't really know what to do with the smothering line.
Yeah.
Because that is the description of a murder? Pretty much, right? Like, I don't think I'm making that up. I think that's like, you're smothered till you, like, the pillow gets darker, the bright pink pillow recedes into darkness as it is pressed down ever harder onto the face of the victim.
Yeah. No, I mean, you're absolutely right. That is what is in the poem. So you grab your pillow and smother him as he cries into the fabric. You hold still until he's very quiet. So one reference to another poem in Night Sky with Exit Wounds that will slightly, I don't know if illuminate, but suggest something, is called Into the Breach. It begins with a quote from Jeffrey Dahmer. The only motive that there ever was to keep them with me as long as possible, even if it meant just keeping a part of them. Then the poem is essentially, about loving a man so much that he wants them, like the pieces. So there's kind of like, I never wanted the flesh, how it never fails to fail so accurately. But what if I broke through the skin's thin page anyway and found the heart, not the size of a fist, but your mouth opening to the width of Jerusalem? Anyway, so there's it's interesting because the heart, it's like an old, in this poem, the heart is this old cliche in poetry. It has symbolic value. And there's many ways I think that more modern and contemporary people have still tried to employ the heart as a device while keeping it fresh. And this, in some ways, represents the latest, most intense attempt to do so by being like, no, I'm also talking about taking your heart from your body in the way that Jeffrey Dahmer did and keeping it because I love you that much, or something like that.
I think the link in intensity is clearly there. And that's my suspicion about what this line is for. But just every time I've read through it, and particularly when listening to you read it, I was struck by that line, because I think if of any part of this, that almost takes me out of the poem, because I get hung up on trying to figure out why that's in there, which can be good. I think that it's like that probably for a reason, again, because of how crafted this poem is. But compared to many of the poems we've discussed, I think this is the first time that a line that I think is meant to drill you deeper into the poem has sort of had the opposite effect for me. I still get a lot out of this poem, really enjoy it, but that little set of lines doesn't quite sit naturally for me. Not that it doesn't sit, and not that I don't, particularly knowing that in the collection that contains this poem, there are other poems that make similar connections and references. I think probably if I read it as part of the collection, that wouldn't happen, but it definitely sort of threw me sideways in thinking about this poem, because it reads a little differently than how the rest of the poem is there. There is not the same amount of anaphora or reference to other components in the poem going on in that line. It's sort of like the Hendrix record line. It really sticks out. And because it is so desperately evocative, I get stuck thinking, is the poem actually pointing me here? Because it sticks out, is this where it wants me to sit? And I don't think that's true. I think that the poem wants that to undergird and give us an understanding that's deeper of the rest of what's going on.
That's very interesting. And I think it is strange to me too. And I think there is, the possibility that there's always this question of, when you're looking at poems, it's like, well, maybe this is kind of a mistake, or like not like a typo, but like a sort of thematic error. But at the same time, one thing that I did notice was there's the repetition of he dies, he dies, he dies. And then when that happens, the last he dies is the morning he kisses you. And then after that happens, that's when he gets the pillow and smothers him in the poem. And there is no more repetition of he dies. So that also kills the repetition.
That's very true.
Yeah. And it feels like, I wonder, and maybe this isn't the best way that Ocean Vuong could have expressed this, but I wonder if you're living with the sort of haunting memory of someone that you've loved who is no longer there, you need to kill them in your memory to be able to go on in the world in some way.
Or kill the negative memories to some extent.
Or
kill that negative part of their departure, because there is so much power in positivity in remembering someone that you want to sort of power through that. I think it's very interesting. So you were kind enough to point out there was an earlier version of this poem.
Oh, yeah.
And that part is very different in the earlier version. And I want to just read that quickly.
So this book came out in 2016, but this poem was published in the University of Southern Indiana Review, I think, and I'm not exactly sure what issue, but it must have been around maybe 2012 or 2013. I had found that, and it's different from the poem that got published in the book.
So the section in the originally published poem reads, "He dies the morning he kisses you for 2 minutes too long, and he says, 'I love you,' followed by, 'I have something to say.' And you quickly grab your favorite pink pillow and smother him as he cries into the soft and darkening fabric. And you hold very still as you look out the window at the streak of ochre light smeared on the young birch, and you breathe. You breathe thinking of summer, the long evenings pressed into smoke-soaked skin. You hold still until he's very quiet, until the room fades black, and you're both standing in the crowded train again." So it brings in more anaphora in how it's writing. There's more callbacks, but it also signals us, along with what your reading is, to those happier memories. And that is where this poem goes, but this injects a second happy memory that the person doing the smothering is thinking of during the smothering process, which more strongly, I think, links it to this reading of strangling out the part of grief that is more negative and transitioning into those positive summer memories.
Yeah, no, I think that's it. That's exactly right. And it definitely is more compressed in the current version, which I think is largely to its credit. But
I think I prefer the finished version to the older version.
Yeah.
Because I think it is accomplishing the same goal with a greater economy of language, and as a result with greater impact.
Yeah. But when you take that risk to use murderous figurative language, your attentive reader is going to be like, what the fuck? And so if it is compressed to the point where it's ambiguous, too ambiguous perhaps, that can really take someone out of the experience.
And I don't know that it would have been any less ambiguous in its previous iteration. I think the ambiguity remains the same, while the impact of the much greater in the finished version. I think it absolutely supports your notion of how we should how we should read that section, I think you're spot on. And I think that having these two versions is really valuable in seeing some authorial intent there.
Cool.
Shall we read it again?
I think we should read it again. Anaphora as coping mechanism. Can't sleep, so you put on his gray boots, nothing else, and step out in the rain. Even though he's gone, you think, I still want to be clean. If only the rain were gasoline, your tongue a lit match, then you can change without disappearing. If only he dies the second his name becomes a tooth in your mouth. But he doesn't. He dies when they wheel him away and the priest ushers you out of the room, your palms 2 puddles of rain. He dies as your heart beats faster, as another war coppers the sky. He dies each night you close your eyes and hear his slow exhale, your fist choking the dark, your fist through the bathroom mirror. He dies at the party where everyone laughs and all you want is to go into the kitchen and make 7 omelets before burning down the house. All you want is to run into the woods and beg the wolf to fuck you up. He dies when you wake and it's November forever. A Hendrix record melted on rusted needle. He dies the morning he kisses you for 2 minutes too long when he says, wait, followed by, I have something to say. And you quickly grab your favorite pink pillow and smother him as he cries into the soft and darkening fabric. You hold still until he's very quiet, until the walls dissolve and you're both standing in the crowded train again. Look how it rocks you back and forth like a slow dance, seen from a distance of years. You're still a freshman. You're still terrified of having only 2 hands. And he doesn't know your name yet, but he smiles anyway. His teeth reflected in the window, reflecting your lips as you mouth hello, your tongue a lit match.
This is co-host Jack Rossiter Munley. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, head on over to Apple Podcasts, leave a review. 5 stars maybe? Those reviews help with the algorithm and are a great way for us to find new listeners. And you can put anything in them. You can write whatever you want. You can just say, oh, this is a good podcast. I like this podcast. You could be like, hey, that Connor guy, he makes a lot of good points. Jack, why is he doing this outro so long? You know, get him off the mic. And whatever you feel like writing, head on over there, 5 stars, drop in the review. Do you have thoughts about this poem? Is there a poem or poet you'd like us to cover on a future episode? Well, we'd love to hear from you. And there are tons of ways that you can get in touch with us. I mean, I guess you could drop it into an iTunes review. You could be like 5 stars. Hey, why don't you talk about insert name of poet here? But you can also send us an email. That's probably the best way to do it. closetalkingpoetry@gmail.com is our email address. Or you can find us on Twitter. I am at Jack Rossiter Munn. Connor is at Connor M. Stratton. And the show is at Close Talking. On Instagram, you can find us there too. We are at Close Talking Poetry. And we are on Facebook at facebook.com/Close Talking. We haven't gotten to TikTok yet. And we might never. Who knows? Anything is possible. Speaking of all those social media platforms, a very special thank you to our incredible social media manager, Corey China, who keeps us active across the internet. And a thank you to all of you for listening. We will see you next time.